So today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Willie Handler, author of Out from the Shadows, Growing Up with Holocaust Survivor Parents. Welcome, Willie.
Thank you for having me.
I am really happy to have you. Before we really get into your book and your writing, why don't you give everyone a quick, what are they going to find when they open up these pages?
Well, my life story, more or less, but actually, it's more than that. This is not like I think an ordinary memoir. Sometimes I refer to it as an investigative memoir. So,
Okay.
the beginning of the book really gives the history of my family, which I actually did not know, and I had to spend 2 years researching. My parents are no longer around, and they didn't say much.
Right.
And then it gets into my childhood, and then I talk about things like trauma, and which is very common in families of Holocaust survivors.
Right.
And then the end piece is a little bit of background about anti-Semitism.
Fantastic. What made you decide to do this? Your parents were gone. They had never really talked too much about being Holocaust survivors. What made you decide that you were going to kind of like open that all up for inspection?
I never wanted to write this book. And that's what I tell everybody. This was not my idea. I was against it. My wife kept telling me, you should write your parents' story. You know, people would find it interesting. And I said, oh, this world doesn't need another Holocaust book.
Right.
And then, I started thinking about it and going, well, I don't know that much. I don't know much about my family's history.
Right.
I swear to God, I didn't even know the names of some of my aunts and uncles. They had perished in the war, and their names were never mentioned.
Right.
So my own curiosity, I started to dig up stuff. I remember when I first put pen to paper, though really I wasn't using pen or paper, so to speak. I wrote an 1,800-word blog post. That was all I knew. That was it. And a lot of it was wrong, as I found out. And so I became curious, and I wanted to find out what were their stories and who were my ancestors. And then I realized nobody in the family knows either. And that's when I decided I'm going to write the book after all. And I wrote this book for my grandkids.
Yeah.
That they would know, and they would be able to tell their kids one day. And lo and behold, I found out, well, there's a lot of people out there who want to hear this story as well. And although the book is with its release on November 9th, it's actually doing very well.
Right. Right. So let's talk a little bit about that research. Your mom and dad were gone. Many of the people who could have told stories had perished. And then others have since died of old age and other issues. How did you go about collecting all of this family history?
Well, it was a long process. I sat down with my brother and sister and asked them, what do you remember? What do you know?
Right.
It was not much different than what I knew. And I'm going, well, that doesn't help that much. Then I started doing online searches. I found this Polish database that provided a wealth of information about my father's ancestors, because he was from Poland. Then I found a little bit of information about my mother and her ancestors. I did DNA testing and was able to actually find relatives I didn't even know existed.
Okay.
reached out to them and got information from them. And I'm still hearing I'm still hearing from people who are like third cousins. I just recently heard from somebody from Australia, just I think a month ago, who kind of reached out to me. And so I researched archives, found all kinds of stuff, read some. I read some historical books, some scientific papers, research papers. Like there was a lot of stuff out there, as it turns out, and a lot of it related to family. I actually found somebody who'd written a little piece about my mother's father, the stuff I didn't know about.
Right.
And it's just all started, and then I had to put it all together. I went to Poland 2 years ago and visited my my father's birthplace and where he lived, and I visited Auschwitz, and that was a kind of a heavy moment as well. So it was just, there was a lot of information out there.
I'm sure, and there's probably way more information that you found than you were possibly able to put into the book. Is that?
Yeah. And and I remember my mother was after Steven Spielberg released Schindler's List, he used his share of the film to create a foundation to interview Holocaust survivors. Many tens of thousands were interviewed, and that foundation is now housed at USC. And my mother was interviewed in 1995. I never even looked at the recording. So a couple of years, 2 years ago, I reached out to the foundation, got a copy of her interview. There was a lot of stuff in there I did not even know. And it's kind of, there was a period, for a period of my life, I didn't want to know anything about it. And then, and I've spoken to a lot of other children of Holocaust survivors, and same kind of thing happened is then later in your life, when your parents are no longer around, you have all these questions.
Right. Well, and I suspect some of the reason you didn't want to know about it, I mean, they didn't want to talk about it. It's not like your parents were freely, giving out all kinds of information. And then kids tend not to want to know about things in the past, especially if they're not pretty things. Don't you think that's part of it?
No, I think in this case it's very different. And
was it?
Yes, and I found that one of the things I've been working on is I'm working on another book on trauma experienced by children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. So some of my experiences are exactly the same as other people as well. And one of the things, there's two reasons why survivors do not talk about their experience. One is to shield their children from harmful information.
Right.
In some cases, they will tell you very, very general things that happened, but nothing too specific or graphic. But for many, they were protecting themselves more than anything else, is that they bury those bad memories and all that trauma and don't want to be reminded. So in my father's case, he's a classic example. If I started asking him questions, he would get very emotional and at some point would start to cry. And most children of Holocaust survivors understand that their parents went through great hardship and had a lot of pain and grief and bad memories and don't want to create more pain for them. So that's why they don't ask the questions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it does make sense. Anybody who has been through a traumatic event, they often do not wish to talk about it to kind of keep themselves safe from all those horrible memories. I mean, and then this trauma was, of course, beyond anything that those of us living today can even begin to imagine.
And and the trauma they experience is no different than any other person who experiences post-traumatic stress. It's treated the same way, and it manifests itself in the same way. But yeah, their experience was in many cases quite extended. And as I also talk to these children and grandchildren of survivors and find out about their parents and their grandparents' experience, the source of the trauma is like all over the place too, because they weren't all in concentration camps.
Right.
But they experienced some form of trauma during the war.
Right. Absolutely. What's something you learned that was completely unexpected? Like you're doing the research and you just kind of that moment where you just, whoa.
Oh, there was one huge one that literally destroyed me. One of the things my father did repeatedly say, that he had lost a wife and child during the war.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1940, when he was actually in the ghetto, he got married and had a child, and her name was Leah. And this was repeated over and over again, and and all I knew is that she was 4 years old, his daughter. So one of the things that I wanted to uncover was 4 years old when? Like, when was she born? And I didn't know when he was married.
Right.
I just knew her first name. So I started digging up in a database, and I got a listing of birth and marriage. Actually, I step back a bit. The first thing that seemed unusual is in one of the archives of Nazi documents, I found a registration card in one of the camps that he was in, and it listed his wife's name. So that's when I found out, excuse me, her last name.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had 2 daughters, 2 and 4. And two children, if I recall. And I'm going, what? That can't be right. And I'm going, no, I just thought that was an error. So going forward, I wanted to find out when he was married and when his daughter was born. And the records come back, and I found, and it gave the date of their marriage, and it listed 2 kids, 2 daughters. I'm going, what? And it just kind of hit me. I'm going, what? How could that be? And I told my siblings, and I told the family, and everybody was like in shock, absolutely in shock. And so that's kind of what sent me scrambling to Poland. And so I needed to find out how could this possibly be? How did he forget about it? Was he not around at the time? Had he been already deported to the camps when she was born? And who knows? There was no way of knowing. And so when I went to Poland in 2022, I went to the town hall, and they retrieved the documents, and they had registration books, and they handwrite all the births, deaths, and marriages in a registration. And they showed me the 2 birth registrations, and they were in German. And so I took photos of them to get translated. And I see at the bottom, my father had signed the documents. So he knew he had 2 children, and going, and my conclusion was that the trauma that he experienced, he pushed the memory of that younger child out of his head.
Yeah.
And
It was one more death he couldn't handle, and so he just
I'm
chose
not
not
even
to think about it.
I'm not even sure he knew when they died
Yeah, probably not.
because he was not around
Right.
when they were deported to Auschwitz.
Yeah, that would have been a very difficult thing to find. So, let's talk a little bit. You were bringing up this idea of generational trauma. And
Right.
let's talk a little bit like what is that? And then how did it affect you? How has it affected your kids, your grandkids? Like at what point does generational trauma no longer have a ripple in the following generations?
Well, one thing that nobody really knows, I think,
Yeah.
that's my view. So trauma gets stored. I'm not a clinician, but I understand that trauma gets stored in the body. And somehow it gets stored in your genes and actually can alter the genes. And once it gets stored in your genes, obviously it can get passed down to your children. And that's how it gets passed down. And it will get passed down each generation. And until you, and this part I'm not totally clear, but I think if you there are ways to sort of stop the transmission, or at least modify it, which is to do exactly what I've done, which is to openly talk about it, share the experience, let your children know about what happened, get them to be open about their own experiences rather than holding it in, because
Right.
holding it in means you're going to store it in your body and somehow it's going to get transmitted down. So that's really how it works. Now, interesting observation that I found that when I was talking to a lot of children survivors was they didn't have great childhoods. So what you actually have is a combination of things working. And then I think in most people that's the case. Most people have been exposed to some type of trauma.
Right.
And so how you deal with it, that really determines your kind of future. So many of them, they had this generational trauma that was passed on to them. But they also might have experienced childhood trauma. They might have been victims of sexual abuse. And so there's many layers of trauma.
Right.
And that's where it gets very complicated.
Absolutely. How do you think your parents' trauma affected you as a child?
Well, I had very loving parents,
Mm-hmm.
but they were what I would say distant and uninvolved. They were focused on survival. Literally, you come out of the camps and you reestablish your life, but you're still in survival mode. And their focus was on making a living, providing food, shelter, clothing. That's kind of about it. And so they're uninvolved in distance, which means as a child, you're on your own a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You're not getting much guidance. And so no one helped me with my homework. No one helped me with problems that I had with other kids. Nobody helped me choose a school to go to, what courses I should take, took me to sports and other activities. None of that happened.
Right.
You're on your own. I joined sports teams on my own, got my own equipment, went to practices on my own. Everything was on your own. So you grow up too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You become very independent, but you also are constantly in survival mode. So you're insecure, lack confidence, lack trust, because those are things that were not, you didn't have the parental guidance to guide you through sort of these difficult times.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of just builds up on you. So that's directly result of their trauma. But as well, there are other aspects that manifest itself that, like, I inherited my father's grief. So his grief for his family, I experienced that. And his mistrust of people, I inherited that. So and his ability to store and compartmentalize bad memories, I picked that one up as well. So those are things, so it's a combination of your childhood experiences and things that were actually directly passed on.
Passed down to you. Right. When people read your book, what are you hoping they take away? If they took away one thing, what do you want them to really understand after reading Out of the Shadows?
There are a few lessons in there, but I think most importantly is that the legacy of the Holocaust, or the shadow, as I call it,
right,
lives on. And so, and the descendants are invisible victims. They don't talk about their experience. Nobody really has a clue that these people are as damaged as their parents were. And I think that's something that I didn't even realize. So if I didn't really understand it,
right,
nobody does.
Right. Someone like me wouldn't know it because having not lived that. And
Right.
Here you're saying you lived it and didn't recognize the damage that it caused.
Right.
I think the other thing that I really got when I read it was a comprehension of, we often think that this Holocaust, this happened in the 40s and could never happen again. Like it just could never happen again. And especially in the last part of your book, where you're talking more about anti-Semitism and what that looks like, I recognize that it can happen again, and it may actually already be happening in some ways again. Maybe not to the same extent, maybe not in the exact same way, but that those kinds of things can continue to happen. And I think that really opened my eyes to the idea that we can't say it's in the past and then just kind of do like this.
The one thing I can say about anti-Semitism, it's been around thousands of years.
Right.
It has never gone away. It may go below the surface. It's cyclical in nature. But the basis has never changed. And so what we're experiencing right now is that all that hate that's been under the surface mostly, but not exclusively, is coming to the surface again. And I've heard many people, two observations I have. One is, when I interviewed children of survivors, I asked them all, what kind of anti-Semitism were you exposed to growing up? Most of them said none. But it was there, but they didn't experience, they didn't see it. And so this explosion of anti-Semitism that's going around now is a complete shock to them, is traumatizing them, because it's something to them, it's something new.
Right.
And so and so they're kind of reliving their parents' experience.
What I want to know is, as someone who hasn't had your experiences, who is not Jewish, what can someone like me, other people in the world, do about this hate that's happening again? What can be done to make sure that another Holocaust type situation does not occur? What do we do about that?
For one thing, I don't believe we're heading towards another Holocaust.
Good.
But we are in a period of a lot of persecution. I call this now the post-Holocaust period. October 7th, 2023 began what I would say is a post-Holocaust, where if there was any sympathy for Jews between 1945 and 2023, it disappeared. So that's one thing. And in fact, a lot of my non-Jewish friends, many of them say they don't see it because, when it comes to hate, unless it's directed
at you, you don't notice it.
You don't notice it.
Right.
And these are people who are sympathetic, but they don't see it.
Right.
Right.
Well, and I think it's the way it is with any racist kind of thing that's going on in the world. If you're not experiencing it, it's easy to deny it. Well, it's not happening. I've never seen it, but it's because it's never aimed at you. So,
right. But what people can do is educate yourself.
Okay.
Because guess what? The school system doesn't tell you what's in my book.
No, it does not.
That I've been told by many, many people. Oh, this is not how the war was described to be at school.
Right.
So that's one thing. So you need to learn about what happened. You have to really learn about the history of anti-Semitism, which is the basis is actually on conspiracy theories. Way before there was, Anon and all these, way before the internet, there were always conspiracy theories directed at Jewish people.
Right.
And so the one step is, get yourself educated, learn what really is going on. Two is speak out, support Jewish people, because right now there's a shortage of allies, and what's going on in the Middle East is a tragedy. But that is what hate will bring you to.
Right.
And there's hate on both sides. There's
Right.
no question. So, but that has nothing to do with diaspora Jews. They're not fighting. And so when you see it whether you're in London or you live in New York or wherever you live, when you see it, you have to speak out. And you have to speak out and you also have to push politicians to protect everyone's human rights, not just some of us.
Right. I agree. All right. So, hey, guys, if you want to continue this conversation, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. I'll have a post there, and you'll have the opportunity to win a copy of Willie's book. So head on over there today. Willie, if someone wanted to get up with you and talk a little more deeply about your book, or ask you questions, or find out more about what you understand about generational trauma, how do they reach out to you?
Let me see. So I do have an email. I guess I should share that.
Well, you can share your email, but you might also share your website, which I'll put that in the show notes.
What I was going to say is you can contact me through my website.
That's probably the easiest way then for people.
And so there's a contact page, and It is simply williehandler.com.
Perfect.
I know I can remember that.
Yeah.
And I'm and and the thing is, part of what I do is and part of the why I wrote the memoir is to do Holocaust education. So
Right.
I'm always open to appear, to talk about the Holocaust and the
Fantastic.
implications and what really happened. There may be people who may have groups, church groups, synagogue groups, whatever, and
Great.
I'm always available.
Fantastic. Well, Willie, I want to thank you so much for being with me today. I want to thank you for writing the book. I know that it must have been a very difficult endeavor to learn all that you learned, but to share it with the world, I think, was the right thing to do.
Thank you so much. And nice meeting you, Terry.
Nice meeting you as well. Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.